The air in Heavenwood hung heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. A small town nestled at the foot of jagged, mist-shrouded mountains. The streets were lined with weathered clapboard houses, their porches sagging under the weight of time, while the distant hum of the sawmill pulsed like a heartbeat through the valley. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your secrets whether you liked it or not. Lila Carver stood at the edge of her kitchen, her hands trembling as she clutched a mug of coffee gone cold. At 34, she was a woman of quiet strength, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her hazel eyes sharp with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. She'd built a life Harriton years married to Ben, a mechanic with calloused hands and a laugh that could light up a room. They weren't rich, but they were steady. Or so she thought. The envelope lay on the counter like a coiled snake, its edges worn from being stuffed in a drawer for weeks. She'd found it by accident, tucked behind a stack of unpaid bills in Ben's toolbox. Her name was scrawled on the front in his familiar slanted handwriting, but it was the contents that had gutted her. A single photograph, grainy but unmistakable. Ben, shirtless and grinning, his arms slung around a woman with crimson lipstick and a cascade of blonde hair. They were on a pier somewhere Lila had never been. A date was scratched on the back. The 17th of July 2 summers ago, when Ben had claimed he was fixing a rig upstate. Lila? His voice jolted her back to the present. She turned to see him in the doorway, his flannel shirt unbuttoned over a grease-stained tee, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He frowned, his blue eyes narrowing as they landed on the envelope. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She forced a smile, her heart hammering. "Just tired. Long day at the clinic." A lie. She called out sick from her nursing job, unable to focus since the discovery. Her fingers tightened around the mug. "How was the shop?" "Same old," he said, crossing to the fridge. He grabbed a beer, the clink of the bottle against the shelf unnaturally loud in the silence. "Got a big job tomorrow, though. Might need to pull an all-nighter." Her stomach twisted. Another late night. Another excuse. She watched him pop the cap off the bottle, the casual ease of his movements clashing with the storm brewing inside her. "Ben," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. "Where were you 2 summers ago? July?" He froze, mid-sip, then lowered the bottle slowly. "What's this about?" "Just curious." She slid the envelope across the counter, her eyes locked on his. "Found this." His face drained of color as he stared at the photograph peeking out. For a moment, the only sound was the drip of the faucet, each drop a countdown to something inevitable. Then he laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that didn't reach his eyes. That's nothing. Just some old fishing trip with the guys. You're digging through my stuff now?" "Fishing trip," she repeated, her voice flat. "With her?" "Lila, come on." "Don't." She stepped closer, her anger flaring hot and bright. "Don't lie to me. I deserve the truth." He opened his mouth, then closed it, his jaw tightening. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words, until a sharp knock at the door shattered it. They both flinched. Ben muttered a curse and strode to answer it, leaving Lila standing there, her pulse racing. Through the screen door she glimpsed a man in a crisp suit, polished for Havenwood. He held a leather briefcase, his voice low and urgent as he spoke to Ben. "Mr. Carver, we need to discuss the account. It's active again. $3 million deposited yesterday." Lila's breath caught. $3 million? They barely had 300 in savings. Ben shot a glance back at her, his expression unreadable, before stepping outside and pulling the door shut behind him. She moved to the window, peering through the blinds. The man handed Ben a tablet, its screen glowing with numbers and graphs. Ben's shoulders stiffened, and he shook his head, his voice rising just enough for her to catch fragments. "Told her it was over. Can't know about this." The coffee mug slipped from Lila's hands, shattering on the floor. Her mind reeled. Infidelity was one thing, but this? Money, secrets, a stranger at their door. She stumbled back, her gaze darting to the photograph still on the counter. The woman's smile seemed to mock her now, a taunt from a past that was unraveling her present. Outside, The man in the suit climbed into a sleek black car and drove off. Ben lingered on the porch, staring at the ground, his hands clenched into fists. When he finally turned back toward the house, Lila's heart thudded against her ribs. Whatever he was hiding, it was bigger than an affair, and it was about to crash into their lives like a runaway train. She had seconds to decide. Confront him now, or play the game and uncover the truth herself. The doorknob rattled as he stepped back inside. The door creaked open, and Ben stepped back into the kitchen, his boots tracking mud across the linoleum. Lila stood frozen by the counter, the broken mug at her feet a jagged mirror of her fractured thoughts. His eyes flicked to the mess, then to her, and for a split second, she saw something flicker in his gaze. Guilt, maybe, or fear. It vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that easy grin she used to love. "Clumsy tonight, huh?" he said, brushing past her to grab a dish towel. He crouched to scoop up the shards, his movements deliberate, like he was buying time. "You sure you're okay? You're acting weird." Lila's throat tightened, weird, as if she were the one keeping secrets. She forced her voice to stay calm, though it trembled at the edges. "Who was that guy, Ben?" He didn't look up, just kept wiping the coffee spill with slow, methodical swipes. "Some suit from the bank, wrong address or something. Kept going on about accounts I don't even have." He chuckled, but it sounded hollow, like a cracked bell. "Probably thought I was one of those lumber barons up on the ridge." Her nails dug into her palms. $3 million didn't sound like a mix-up. She wanted to scream, to shake him until the lies spilled out. But the photograph burned in her peripheral vision, a reminder of how little she really knew him. She needed answers, not just confessions, and that meant playing smarter than he was. "Right," she said, stepping over the mess to rinse her hands in the sink. The cold water steadied her, grounding her resolve. "Guess it's easy to get lost out here." He stood, tossing the towel onto the counter, and leaned against the fridge, watching her. "Yeah, easy to lose track of a lot of things." His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it, a challenge she couldn't quite read. "I'm gonna shower. Long day." As he disappeared down the hall, Lila's mind raced. The bank story was flimsy. Havenwood's only branch was a single-teller window that closed at 3. Whoever that man was, he wasn't local, and Ben's reaction wasn't innocent. She grabbed the photograph and shoved it into her pocket, then slipped out the back door into the crisp night air. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels, their peaks swallowed by swirling fog. She hurried to the garage, where Ben's truck sat parked beside her beat-up hatchback. If he was hiding something, there might be a trail. She popped the truck's glove box, her breath hitching as she rifled through receipts and crumpled maps. Nothing until her fingers brushed a small, leather-bound notebook wedged beneath the seat. She flipped it open under the dim glow of her phone's flashlight. Pages of numbers, dates, and cryptic shorthand filled the lines, none of it making sense until she hit a name: Cassidy. Scrawled beside it was an address in Portland, 2 hours west, and a figure: $50 K. Her pulse quickened. Was Cassidy the woman in the photo? A lover? A partner in whatever this money scheme was? Below the entry, a more recent note in fresher ink: the 11th of March transfer complete. Keep her out of it. Yesterday, the day before the stranger showed up. Keep her out of either, meaning Lila. She snapped the notebook shut, her breath clouding in the chilly air. The sound of the shower still hummed through the house. She had time, but not much. Back inside, she hid the notebook in her sewing box, her hands shaking as she pieced together a plan. Confronting Ben now would only get her more lies. She needed to know who Cassidy was, what the money meant, and why Ben was so desperate to keep it all buried. The betrayal stung sharp and deep, but it was the mystery that fueled her now, a spark of defiance lighting up the hurt. The next morning, Ben left early, claiming another big job at the shop. Lila waited until his truck rumbled out of sight, then grabbed her keys and the notebook. Portland was a risk, but staying in the dark was worse. The drive stretched her nerves taut, the highway cutting through endless pines, until the city skyline broke the horizon steel and glass glinting under a gray sky. The address led her to a sleek high-rise in the Pearl District, far cry from Havenwood's rust and grit. She parked across the street, her heart pounding as she watched the entrance. Minutes ticked by, then an hour. Just as she started to doubt herself, a woman stepped out tall, blonde, her red lipstick a slash of color against a tailored coat. It was her, the woman from the photo. Lila's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Before she could decide her next move, the woman climbed into a Cara black sedan, identical to the one from last night. It pulled away, and Lila followed, her hatchback weaving through traffic until they reached a warehouse on the edge of town. The woman disappeared inside, and moments later, a familiar figure emerged from a side door. Ben. He wasn't at the shop. He was here, with her. Lila's stomach lurched as she fumbled for her phone, snapping a blurry photo of them talking, Ben gesturing wildly. The woman calm but insistent. Then the woman handed him an envelope, and he tucked it into his jacket, glancing around like a man who knew he was being watched. Lila ducked lower in her seat, her mind spinning. What was he into? Drugs? Fraud? And why drag her life into it? As Ben turned back toward the warehouse, a text buzzed on her phone from him. Home late again. Love you. The lie hit like a slap. She stared at the warehouse, the notebook burning a hole in her bag, and made a choice. She wasn't going back to Havenwood yet. Not until she had leverage. Night fell as she waited, parked in the shadows. Then the warehouse door swung open again, and a new figure stepped out, a man in a suit, carrying that same leather briefcase. He climbed into the sedan and drove off. Lila hesitated, then tailed him, her headlights off, heart in her throat. The car led her to a quiet street, where it parked outside a nondescript house. The man went inside, and through the window, she saw him sit at a table opposite, a woman who wasn't Cassidy. It was her mother. Lila's world tilted. Her mother, who'd left Havenwood years ago after a bitter divorce, who'd cut ties with every including Lila. What was she doing here, tied to Ben's secrets? The man opened the briefcase, revealing stacks of cash, and her mother smiled a cold, calculating smile Lila didn't recognize. The sedan's engine roared to life again, snapping Lila out of her shock. She had to move, had to understand, but how? Her mother, Ben, Cassidy, the money, it was a web, and she was caught in it. As the car pulled away, headlights swept the street, and for a fleeting second, her mother's eyes met hers through the glass. Lila's breath caught in her chest as her mother's gaze locked onto hers through the car window. For a heartbeat, time stopped, the streetlights casting long shadows, the hum of the sedan's engine a low growl in the night. Then the older woman's expression shifted, from surprise to something harder, colder, before she turned away. The car sped off, tires squealing against the pavement, leaving Lila trembling in her hatchback. Her mother, Ellen, the woman who'd walked out when Lila was 16, leaving behind a terse note and a town full of whispers. Lila had spent years burying the hurt, convincing herself she didn't need answers. Now, here she waist-angled in Ben's lies, staring at a ghost who didn't look sorry. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Part of her wanted to chase the sedan, to pound on her mother's door and demand the truth. But the notebook in her bag, the photo on her phone, the cash in that briefcase, they were pieces of a puzzle she couldn't force together yet. She needed more. She needed control. The house loomed across the street, its curtains drawn tight now. No sign of life beyond the flicker of a lamp. Lila's phone buzzed again, another text from Ben. Shop's a mess. Might crash there tonight. Her lip curled. He was still playing the game, oblivious to how much she'd seen. Good. Let him think he was safe. She drove back to the warehouse, parking a block away, under a sagging oak. The building squatted in the dark, its corrugated walls streaked with rust, a single floodlight buzzing above the entrance. Cassidy and Ben were long gone, but the place felt alive, too quiet, too still. like it was holding its breath. Lila slipped out of the car, the notebook tucked into her jacket, and crept closer, her sneakers silent on the damp asphalt. A side door hung ajar, a sliver of yellow light spilling out. She hesitated, her pulse thudding in her ears, then nudged it open with her shoulder. Inside, the air was thick with the tang of oil and metal. Crates lined the walls, stacked high with labels she couldn't read in the dimness. Voices drifted from deeper, within low, clipped, urgent. She edged along the wall, ducking behind a pallet as two figures came into view. One was the man in the suit from earlier, his briefcase open on a folding table, papers scattered across it. The other was a stranger tall, wiry, with a scar snaking down his neck. He tapped a pen against the table, his voice sharp. "The deposit cleared, but we've got a problem. Carver's asking questions. Wants a bigger cut." The suited man snorted, adjusting his tie. "He'll take what we give him. He's in too deep to back out now." Lila's stomach churned. Ben wasn't just cheating. He was part of this, whatever this was. She strained to hear more, but Scar leaned closer, dropping his voice. "And the wife? She's a loose end." "She's clueless," Suit said, waving a hand. "Thinks it's just an affair. Ellen's keeping an eye on her." Ellen. Her mother's name hit like a punch. Lila's vision blurred, rage and betrayal swirling together. Her mother wasn't just involved, she was watching her, manipulating her. For what? Money? Power? Revenge? She shifted to get a better look, and her elbow brushed a crate. It teetered, then crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter, spilling bolts across the concrete. The men snapped upright, heads whipping toward her. "What the hell was that?" Scar barked, reaching for something at his waist, a gun. Lila bolted, her heart slamming against her ribs as she darted back through the door. Footsteps pounded behind her, shouts echoing off the walls. She sprinted for her car, fumbling with the keys as she threw herself inside. The engine sputtered, then roared to life just as Scar burst out, his silhouette stark against the floodlight. He raised his arm, but she floored the gas, tires screeching as she peeled away into the night. Her hands shook on the wheel, adrenaline flooding her veins. She didn't stop until she hit the highway, the warehouse shrinking in her rearview mirror. Her phone lit up Ben again. "You home? Call me." She ignored it, her mind racing. Clueless, they'd said. A loose end. She wasn't either, not anymore. Back in Havenwood, the house was dark when she pulled in at dawn. The mountains a bruised purple against the sky. Ben's truck wasn't there still, at the shop, no doubt. She locked the door behind her, then spread the notebook and photo on the kitchen table, staring at the evidence of her unraveling life. The numbers, the dates, Cassidy, her mother. It was a knot she had to untangle, but she couldn't do it alone. She grabbed her laptop and started digging. A reverse search on the Portland address linked it to a shell company, Emerald Ventures. Public records showed a single name tied to it: Ellen Marie Tate, her mother. Another search on Cassidy pulled up a LinkedIn profile. Cassidy Holt, financial consultant, recently relocated to Portland. The pieces were connecting, but the picture was still blurry. A noise outside snapped her head up a low rumble, like an engine idling. She crept to the window, peering through the blinds. A black sedan sat at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the first streaks of sunrise. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out: Cassidy, her blonde hair catching the light, a phone pressed to her ear. Lila's breath hitched. She ducked back, her mind spinning. Had they followed her, or had Ben sent her? The phone in her pocket buzzed, and she glanced at the screen at an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, keeping her voice low. "Lila." A woman's voice purred, smooth and familiar. "Cassidy, we need to talk. You're poking around in things you don't understand." "How do you know my name?" Lila snapped, though she already knew the answer. A soft laugh. "Ben talks about you all the time. Poor thing, he didn't want you dragged into this. But you're here now, aren't you? Meet me. Alone. The old mill noon." The line went dead. Lila stared at the phone, then at the sedan pulling away. A trap? A chance? She didn't know, but one thing was clear. Cassidy wasn't afraid of her. Not yet. By noon, the mist had thickened, cloaking Havenwood's abandoned mill in a ghostly shroud. Lila parked a quarter-mile away, her heart pounding as she approached on foot. The mill's broken windows gaped like empty eyes, the air sharp with rot and rust. Cassidy waited by the entrance, leaning against a rusted beam, her red lipstick a stark contrast to the gray. "You're brave," Cassidy said, smirking as Lila stopped a few feet away. "Or stupid." "I want answers," Lila said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "What's Ben into? What's my mother got to do with it?" Cassidy's smirk faded, her eyes narrowing. "You think this is about an affair? Sweetheart, you're in over your head. That $3 million? It's dirty laundered through Emerald Ventures. Ben's been moving it for us. Your mother's the brains, I'm the face, and he's the muscle. Worked fine until he got greedy." Lila's legs felt weak, but she held her ground. "And me? You're collateral," Cassidy said, stepping closer. "Ellen wanted you kept out. Ben didn't. Guess who won?" Before Lila could respond, a crack split the air, a twig snapping in the woods behind the mill. Cassidy whirled, her hand dipping into her coat, but it was too late. A figure emerged from the mist, tall and scarred, a pistol glinting in his grip. "Scar." He grinned, his voice a low rasp. "Time's up, ladies." The truck idled on the deserted back road, its engine a low growl beneath the oppressive silence of the mountains. Lila stared at the flash drive in Ben's trembling hand. The note's words, insurance. Use it wisely, searing into her mind. Her chest ached with a cocktail of fury, fear, and exhaustion. The weight of the past 24 hours pressing down like the mist outside. "What is it?" she demanded, her voice raw. "What's on it?" Ben swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he turned the drive over in his fingers. "I don't know, but if it's from them, from Ellen, it's either a lifeline or a noose." "Then plug it in," she said, nodding at the truck's dashboard. "Now." He hesitated, his eyes searching hers, then plugged the drive into the USB port. The dashboard screen flickered to life, displaying a single video file. With a shaky breath, he hit play. The grainy footage showed a dimly lit room, concrete walls, a metal desk hand, two figures, Scar pacing with his pistol, and Ellen seated, her posture regal despite the setting. Her mother's voice crackled through the speakers, calm and cutting. "Carver's a liability," Ellen said, tapping a manicured nail on the desk. "He's soft too attached to her. Cassidy was supposed to keep him in line, but she's faltering too. If they talk, it's over. The accounts, the clients, all of it." Scar grunted, holstering his gun. "So we cut them loose, permanently." "No," Ellen snapped, her eyes flashing. "Lila's off limits. She's my daughter, not a pawn. Ben's the problem. Make it look like an accident truck goes off the ridge. Mechanical failure. She'll grieve, but she'll stay quiet." The video cut out, leaving silence heavier than the gunshot that had ended Cassidy. Lila's stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. Her mother, her own mother, had orchestrated this, sparing her life, but shredding her world. Ben's face was a mask of horror, his hands gripping the wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "She was going to kill me," he whispered, "and frame it for you." Lila's nails dug into her palms, her voice trembling with rage. "She's been playing us both. The money, the leash. She didn't just ruin our marriage, Ben. She ruined us." He turned to her, his eyes red-rimmed. "I didn't want this, Lila. I swear. It started small, moving cash for extra jobs, helping her out after she left her dad. Then it snowballed. I couldn't stop. Couldn't or wouldn't." She shot back, tears spilling over. "You had a choice. I didn't." Before he could answer, headlights pierced the mist behind them, twin beams slicing through the dusk. Ben cursed, shoving the flash drive into his pocket as the rumble of an engine grew closer. Lila's heart leapt into her throat. It was the black sedan, its sleek shape unmistakable. "Drive," she said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her. "Now." He floored it, the truck lurching forward as the sedan gained ground. The road twisted through the pines, gravel spitting under the tires. Lila braced herself, her mind racing. They couldn't outrun it, not forever. But they had the video, proof of Ellen's orders, Scar's threat. It was leverage, if they could use it. The sedan swerved, pulling alongside them, and the window rolled down. Scar leaned out, his scarred face twisted in a snarl, the pistol gleaming in his hand. "Pull over, Carver. Last chance." Ben gritted his teeth, yanking the wheel hard. The truck veered off the road, crashing through underbrush as branches snapped against the windshield. Scar Frietta shot that pinged off the tailgate and Lila ducked, her scream swallowed by the chaos. The sedan followed, relentless, until the trees thinned and the edge of a ravine loomed ahead, its drop shrouded in fog. "Hold on," Ben shouted, slamming the brakes. The truck skidded, tires locking, and stopped inches from the cliff. The sedan screeched to a halt behind them, boxing them in. Scar climbed out, gun raised, his boots crunching on the dirt. "End of the line," he called, advancing. "Hand over the drive, and maybe I let her walk." Lila's mind whirled. They were trapped out of road, out of time, but she wasn't helpless. Not anymore. She grabbed Ben's arm, her voice low and fierce. "Give it to me." "What?" he hissed, confused. "The drive. Trust me." He hesitated, then pressed it into her hand. She slipped it into her sleeve, her heart pounding as Scar reached the truck and yanked Ben's door open. "Out, both of you." They stumbled into the cold, Scar's gun trained on Ben. Lila raised her hands, her voice shaking but clear. "You want the drive? It's not here. I sent it, uploaded it to a friend at the clinic. Kill us, and it goes public. Everything. Ellen's name, your face, the money." Scar's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" she said, stepping closer, her fear hardening into resolve. "You said I'm a loose end. Test me." For a long, breathless moment, he stared at her, the gun steady. Then he lowered it, spitting into the dirt. "You're more like her than I thought," he muttered, backing toward the sedan. "This ain't over." He climbed in and peeled away, the taillights vanishing into the mist. Lila's legs buckled, and she sank to the ground, the adrenaline draining out of her. Ben dropped beside her, his breath ragged. "Did you really send it?" "No," she admitted, pulling the drive from her sleeve. "But he doesn't know that." He let out a shaky laugh, running a hand through his hair. "You're incredible, you know that?" "Don't," she said, her voice breaking. "We're not okay. You're not forgiven." "I know," he said quietly, his gaze dropping. "But I'll fix this, whatever it takes." She didn't respond, staring at the ravine, the mist curling up like ghosts. The drive felt heavy in her hand, evidence that could ruin Ellen, Scar, the whole operation. She could turn it over to the police, expose everything, and watch her mother fall. Or she could hold on to it, use it to force Ellen out of their lives for good. Both paths promised pain, but also power. The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in hues of blood and gold. Lila stood, brushing dirt from her jeans, and looked at Ben. "We're done running. Tomorrow we decide together." He nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. She didn't know if they'd rebuild, or if the cracks were too deep, but for the first time in days, she felt the reins in her hands. Whatever came next, justice, revenge, or something else, it was hers to choose. As they climbed back into the truck, the wind carried a faint sound through the valley, a distant siren, growing closer.